The humid air of Bladenboro hung thick as we pulled our gear from the truck. Summer in North Carolina had a way of draping you in its heat, the kind that clings to your skin and makes even breathing feel like an effort. But we didn't mind. The four of us, me, Kevin, Tanya, and Marcus, had planned this fishing trip for months, and nothing was going to ruin it. The Black River ran through this part of the state, its lazy current winding past dense forest that seemed to hum with life. The town had a sleepy charm to it, but the woods felt alive. Being from Chicago, I wasn't used to places like this. Back home, it's all concrete and steel, the constant hum of traffic, the grind of machines. My job as a lumberjack kept me outdoors, but it was nothing like this. Here, the air smelled of pine and damp earth, and the only sounds were the rustle of leaves and the occasional bird call. It reminded me of trips with my uncle when I was a kid. He'd take me out to Lake Michigan, and we'd spend hours fishing, barely talking, but feeling the bond grow stronger with each cast of the line. The plan was simple: fish all day, camp near the river, and head back in the morning. Kevin had picked the spot, a clearing by the water that was supposedly great for bass. The hike in had been uneventful, the trail well-worn and shaded by towering oaks. We reached the clearing just as the sky began to cloud over, the sun turning pale and weak behind a layer of gray. As night fell, we built a fire and settled in. Tanya and Marcus cooked while Kevin and I prepped the fishing gear. The fire crackled, casting long shadows that danced among the trees. I found myself staring into the dark, the flickering light playing tricks on my eyes. It was then I remembered an article I'd read a few weeks back in a fringe magazine. It had talked about strange sightings in North Carolina, something people called the dogman. Half man, half beast, it was said to stalk the woods, preying on those who wandered too far from safety. I dismissed it as folklore, the kind of thing meant to scare campers and sell magazines. But now, in the middle of these woods, the story gnawed at the edges of my mind. The first sign of trouble came with the silence. One moment, the forest was alive with the sounds of insects and night birds, and the next, it was dead quiet. Even the crackle of the fire seemed muted. Kevin noticed it too, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the trees. "You hear that?" he asked. "Or don't hear," Tanya muttered, her voice low. Something moved in the shadows. A branch snapped, loud and sharp, and we all turned toward the sound. At first, I thought it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. But then I saw it, or part of it, a shape, low and sleek, prowling just beyond the firelight. It moved like a predator, its body hunched and deliberate. "What the hell is that?" Marcus whispered, gripping the handle of the hatchet he always carried. The figure paused, its outline barely visible against the dark, and then it rose. It stood on two legs, its form unnaturally tall, its shoulders broad and hunched. The firelight caught its eyes, yellow, reflective, and far too intelligent for any animal I'd ever seen. A low growl rumbled from its throat, deep and resonant, vibrating in my chest. None of us moved, none of us even breathed. The creature took a step closer, its movements fluid, almost human, but not quite. The smell hit me next, something acrid and metallic, like blood and decay. "Back up," I hissed, my voice barely audible, slowly. We inched away from the fire, our eyes never leaving the thing. It watched us, its head tilting slightly, as if deciding what to do next, and then it lunged. The attack was sudden and brutal. It slammed into the fire, scattering embers and sending a shower of sparks into the air. We ran, our boots pounding against the earth, the creature's guttural snarls echoing behind us. Kevin shouted something, but I couldn't make it out. My only thought was to get away, to put as much distance as possible between us and that thing. We didn't stop until we reached the main trail. By then, Tanya was limping, her face pale. The creature had slashed at her leg as we fled, leaving 3 deep gashes that oozed blood. Marcus and I supported her as we stumbled down the path, our breaths ragged and desperate. Somehow, we made it to the road. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance, and we waved frantically, shouting for help. The car stopped, a pickup driven by an older man with a face lined by years of hard living. He didn't ask questions, just helped us into the truck and sped off, his eyes darting toward the dark forest as if he knew. We called my sister once we reached town. I didn't tell her everything, just that we'd been attacked by an animal and needed to get Tanya to a hospital. But as I sat in the waiting room, replaying the night in my mind, I knew what I'd seen, and I knew I'd never forget it. Even now, the memory haunts me. The way it moved, the way it watched us. It wasn't just an animal. It was something else, something older and far more dangerous. And it's still out there, prowling the woods of Bladenboro, waiting for its next prey. Spring in New York's Hudson Valley is a beautiful thing. The trees are waking up, their leaves still bright green and tender. The air carries that damp, earthy smell, a promise of life returning after the cold grip of winter. I had planned this hike with my friends, Chris, Megan, and Taylor, months ago. It was supposed to be a way to escape our routines, shake off the winter blues, and maybe catch some great views. We all needed it. I grew up in Poughkeepsie, a town sandwiched between the Catskill Mountains and the Hudson River. As a gardener, I'm no stranger to long days outdoors, my hands caked in dirt, the sun beating down. But this trip wasn't about work. It was about reconnecting with nature, maybe even finding some peace. I packed light, but I made sure to bring a sturdy knife, something my dad always said you should have in the woods. We parked at the trailhead just as the sun crept high in the sky, its golden light cutting through the morning mist. The path weaved through the woods, the forest alive with the sound of birds and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. We joked and laughed, the kind of easy banter that comes from years of friendship. I didn't think about the stories I'd watched on YouTube, the ones about skinwalkers, until later. At that moment, it was just us and the trail. We reached the clearing we'd chosen as our campsite by late afternoon. The spot was perfect. A flat patch of ground surrounded by tall pines with a view of a distant ridge. The sun was still shining, but the forest was already cooling down. We set up our tents and got a fire going. As the flames crackled and the sun dipped lower, the forest seemed to draw in closer, its shadows longer and darker. It started subtly, the way these things always do. Megan was the first to notice. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her voice just above a whisper. We all stopped talking, our laughter dying as we strained to listen. The woods had gone quiet. No birds, no insects, just the crackle of the fire and the sound of our own breathing. Chris tried to brush it off, saying it was normal for animals to quiet down at night. But there was something off about it, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Then we heard it, a rustle, faint but deliberate, coming from the trees behind our campsite. We all froze, staring into the darkness. "Probably a deer," Taylor said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Deer don't spy on you," Megan shot back. I squinted into the shadows, my hand instinctively going to my knife. There was something there, something just beyond the firelight. I couldn't see it clearly, but I could feel it. It was watching us. We decided to stick close to the fire, the light and warmth a small comfort against the encroaching night. The sounds continued, faint movements in the trees, like something circling us. I thought about those videos I'd watched, the ones about creatures that could mimic voices and appearances, creatures that fed on fear. I hadn't believed them then. I wasn't so sure now. As the night dragged on, the thing in the woods grew bolder. A low, guttural sound, a growl maybe, drifted from the darkness. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to send a chill through all of us. Then came the snap of a branch, closer this time. "Okay, what the hell is that?" Chris said, standing and gripping a large branch he'd pulled from the firewood pile. None of us had an answer. We huddled closer, our backs to the fire, our eyes scanning the trees. The thing stayed hidden, its presence more felt than seen. It was toying with us, letting us know it was there without fully revealing itself. We decided we couldn't just sit and wait. We packed quickly, the fire still burning as we grabbed what we could carry and started down the trail. The moonlight barely pierced the canopy, and our flashlights cast weak beams that seemed to make the shadows deeper. The creature followed us. It stayed just out of sight, but its presence was undeniable. Every so often we'd hear its steps, deliberate, heavy, and the occasional low growl. Megan stumbled, her flashlight clattering to the ground. I helped her up, my heart pounding as I glanced over my shoulder. For a split second, I thought I saw it. A figure, tall and thin, its eyes reflecting the faint light like a predator's. Then it was gone. We didn't stop until we reached the edge of the woods, the small village of Ashford just visible through the trees. My legs burned and my lungs ached, but we kept moving, the creature's presence driving us forward. When we finally reached the safety of the village, I called my brother. I didn't tell him everything, just that we'd been spooked by something in the woods. He offered to drive out and pick us up, and we waited in the small diner that was still open, the fluorescent lights a harsh contrast to the soft, natural glow of the fire we'd left behind. As I sit here now, replaying everything in my mind, I can't shake the feeling that we were lucky to make it out. I don't know what was in those woods, but I know it wasn't human, and I know it's still out there, waiting for the next group of hikers to wander too far into its territory. The rain was falling in a steady rhythm, soaking the ground and pattering against the dense canopy of trees above us. Spring in Maine could be unpredictable, but the crisp air and the promise of fresh game had drawn us into the wilderness anyway. Our hunting trip was supposed to be an adventure, a chance to unplug from the world and immerse ourselves in nature. Instead, it turned into something I'll never forget, and not for the reasons I'd hoped. There were 4 of us: me, Chuck Rambo, and my friends. Dave, a contractor from Boston, Sarah, an EMT who had a knack for storytelling, and Benny, a retired teacher with a dry sense of humor. I grew up in New Orleans, where the swamps and bayous taught me to respect the wild. Hiking had always been my escape, a way to clear my mind after long days as a mechanic. But the Maine woods were something else entirely. The trees here stood tall and ancient, their branches intertwining like a ceiling over a cathedral. The damp earth smelled rich and alive, a stark contrast to the hot, humid air back home. By the time we set up camp, the rain had dwindled to a light drizzle. Our fire crackled weakly against the moisture, but it was enough to ward off the chill. Benny was poking at the embers with a stick, while Sarah told one of her tales about a near miss with a bear on a hike out west. The rain-soaked forest around us was quiet, save for the occasional drip of water from the leaves above. Then we heard it, a sound that didn't belong. It started faint, like a low hum carried on the breeze. At first I thought it was the wind pushing through the trees, but it grew louder, more distinct. A mechanical sort of chittering, like gears grinding together, but organic. It sent a shiver down my spine. "You hear that?" I asked, breaking the lull in conversation. The others nodded, their faces mirroring my unease. Dave stood and scanned the dark forest, his rifle slung over his shoulder. "Probably some kind of animal," he muttered, though his tone was far from confident. But this didn't sound like any animal I'd ever encountered. It seemed to move, circling our camp, the noise rising and falling as if whatever was out there was testing us. Sarah, always the rational one, suggested it might be a bird or some local wildlife unfamiliar to us. Benny, on the other hand, stayed quiet, his brow furrowed as he gripped the knife at his side. The firelight felt feeble against the oppressive darkness. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. My mind raced back to a TV show I'd watched about strange, unidentified creatures. The stories had seemed absurd at the time, tales of beings that defied explanation, lurking just beyond the reach of civilization. Yet here I was, feeling like I'd stepped into one of those episodes. The noise came closer, a sudden burst of clicks and whirs that made my heart leap. Sarah grabbed a flashlight and pointed it toward the trees, but the beam only revealed the rain-slicked bark and dense underbrush. Whatever it was staying out of sight. "We should stay close to the fire," Benny said, his voice low but steady. We did just that, huddling near the flickering flames as the rain continued to fall. I tried to focus on the warmth of the fire, but my thoughts kept drifting back to my family. My sister back home, who always teased me for my love of hiking. my mom, who had a knack for making even the toughest situations seem manageable. I wondered what they'd say if they knew what was happening now. The sounds didn't stop. They grew more erratic, echoing through the woods like some twisted symphony. And then, as suddenly as they had started, they ceased. The silence was deafening, more unnerving than the noise itself. "We need to get out of here," Dave said, his voice tight. We agreed. But the rain and the darkness made it impossible to navigate the narrow trails back to the road. We decided to wait until dawn, taking shifts to keep watch. The hours dragged on, each minute punctuated by the occasional crack of a branch or rustle of leaves that made my heart pound. The creature, if that's what it was still out there. We could feel it. When the first light of morning broke through the clouds, we wasted no time. We packed what we could carry and left the fire burning, unwilling to linger any longer than necessary. The rain had turned the ground to mud, making every step a struggle. We moved quickly but cautiously, our ears straining for any sign of the thing that had haunted us through the night. Halfway to the main road, we heard it again, a guttural, metallic growl closer than before. We broke into a run, fear driving us forward. I didn't look back, but I could hear the thing crashing through the underbrush behind us. It was fast, and it was closing in. Benny stumbled, his foot caught on a root. Dave and I pulled him up, our breaths ragged as we pushed on. The noise was almost deafening now, a cacophony of clicks and growls that seemed to surround us. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. We reached the road moments later, gasping for air. A beat-up pickup truck was approaching, its headlights cutting through the gray morning light. The driver, an older man with a skeptical look, didn't ask many questions when we waved him down. He let us pile into the back, and as the truck pulled away, I caught one last glimpse of the woods. The trees stood tall and silent, their secrets hidden once more. Whatever was out there, it wasn't something I ever wanted to meet again.